Aloha, Kako. I sometimes feel sorry for the first person who ever pitched the idea of farming cows to his fellow hunters. You know, I'm tired of running all over the Fertile Crescent with a pointy stick after antelopes. Maybe we could catch some cows and keep them here in the middle of the village. Yeah, I know, they'd be smelly and noisy and dusty, and we'd have to deal with all the dung, and we'd need to figure out how to grow hay so that we could feed them. And yes, they're going to attract lions to the village, and so we're going to have to protect them and us from predators. But hey, then at least we could eat them whenever we wanted to. What do you say? He was probably laughed out of the village. It would have seemed like a crazy idea at the time. But the logic of farming the animals that we eat is actually pretty compelling. A similar radical revolution is happening right now in our food production systems. But if we get it right this time, offshore aquaculture, farming fish and seaweed and shellfish in the open ocean, could actually help our ailing Earth in a multitude of ways. Just as we previously turned from hunting land animals and birds to domesticated pigs and chickens and cows, so have we begun to turn from hunting seafood, that which we otherwise call fishing, to farming in our lakes and our estuaries and our oceans. Currently, over half the seafood consumed throughout the world comes from farms. And this is a good thing because we all want to eat more seafood. And the oceans are a classic example of the tragedy of the commons writ large. I'm a trained marine biologist who started out my career in fisheries management, trying to control commercial fishing for parrotfish and pearl oysters and giant clams in the coral reefs and lagoons of the Cook Islands, down in the South Pacific. At first, it seemed like a dream job, but over time, I found it dispiriting and disheartening. There was complete misalignment between the collective imperative and the individual incentives. As a community, we needed to limit the catch, the number and the size of the fish that we harvested, and we needed reserve areas where the largest animals could reach their full reproductive capacity. Traditional management measures had worked for generations at a subsistence level, but in a cash economy, each person fishing was motivated to take more. More fish or more pearl shells meant more money. Unless a commercial fishery was regulated and enforced, then the outcome was almost always the same. Where fisheries management is effective, then fine, we can sustainably harvest up to a point. But we can't feed a planet with wild fish any more than we could feed a planet with wild antelope. Even if you could wave a wand and have perfect management of all the wild fish stocks, that would still only meet about 5% of our projected future animal protein needs. And where fisheries management has failed, the results have often been catastrophic. I've seen the consequences of unregulated fishing up front, and it's ugly. I have dived in pearl oyster lagoons that once yielded hundreds of tons of pearl shell, but where I now searched for days to find perhaps the few dozen that were remaining. Once these stocks were wiped out, they never came back. So maybe you've seen this movie before, or you've heard about it, or you've read the book. Do you remember California sardines? No, I didn't think that you would. They've been gone for decades. What about Pacific albacore? No, they're gone too. I watched from afar the classic case of the collapse of the cod fishery in the North Atlantic off New England and Canada. The first biologists to assess this fishery exulted that the stocks were so abundant that there was no way that humanity could ever overfish this fishery. But then You add on some government subsidies, some bigger boats with more powerful engines, better sonar systems, processing and freezing at sea, and the inevitable happens. The catch dropped from around 2 million tonnes per year to almost zero. In 1992, they shut the fishery down completely, and we waited for the stocks to come back. And we waited, and we waited. And here now, almost 30 years later, they still have not returned. A 2004 study estimated that global fish stocks had already been reduced by 90%. There's plenty more fish in the sea, we tell ourselves, until there's not. So there are going to be 9 billion of us out there, and per capita consumption of seafood is projected to increase. With more purchasing power and rising affluence, more people are going to want to eat more sushi and more cioppino and more fish sticks. And your doctor is probably telling you that you should be eating more seafood. It's better for heart health and it's better for your brain. And so just as our ancestors in the Fertile Crescent had figured out that farming was the only way forward, so too do scientists now increasingly recognize that aquaculture, farming of seafood, is the only way to meet this burgeoning demand. And there's now far better understanding that just as it's better to run cattle on the open range of Colorado, where it's better for the ecosystem and it's better for the cows, so too is it better to farm fish in offshore waters, where it's deeper, with brisk currents and away from the coast. Studies have shown that fish grown offshore are healthier, with less stress, fewer pests, and faster growth. Farming fish in the ocean harnesses natural inputs that are all free, the tides and the ocean currents, and further offshore results in less environmental impact. The impact on water quality is often not even measurable, comparing up current versus down current of the net pens. When you look at water quality parameters such as dissolved oxygen or water clarity or nitrogen or phosphorus or other nutrients, you can't tell the difference between water up current and down current of offshore net pens. And in deeper water, further offshore, there's often also less conflict with other ocean users, such as commercial fishing or recreational boating or transportation or communication. Norway, one of the true leaders globally in aquaculture, is now incentivizing the move offshore for fish such as salmon. They're now deploying and harvesting massive net pens way offshore in the North Sea that use underwater video and computerized feed systems with artificial intelligence tracking the growth and health of individual fish. We can take this to scale offshore, literally beyond the blue horizon. A recent study by researchers out of the Bren School at the University of California, Santa Barbara, found that we could match the production of all of the wild caught fish all over the world with offshore aquaculture by using just 0.015% of the ocean's surface area. So how big an area is that? It's about the size of Lake Michigan. So, okay, we can give a man to fish, but that's not enough to just meet projected seafood needs. We need to increase demand, eating more seafood, so that offshore aquaculture can start to address the more pressing global imperatives. Because with 3 billion people about to rise into the middle class in the next few decades, if they're eating beef at the rate that Americans eat hamburger, then we're going to end up with an atmosphere that's more like Venus and with soils that are more like Mars. There is simply not enough land area and there's not enough fresh water. And the methane and the nitrous oxide from farmed livestock is one of the greatest contributors to the global climate crisis. This is widely recognized. The primary conclusion of a study back in 2012, led by Conservation International, was that aquaculture has to be a key element in reducing the global footprint of growing animals for food. One of the 5 major recommendations from a recent United Nations high-level panel on global climate change in the oceans was that humanity must move to start to source more of its food from the seas. WWF has recognized this and set up the Aquaculture Stewardship Council, the world's most rigorous certification program for farmed seafood. And other non-profit conservation groups are advocating for expanding offshore aquaculture in the US. We should remember this is an industry that's been around about as long as personal computers. Just as your old IBM desktop with DOS has evolved to where you now have a supercomputer in your pocket, so has fish farming made phenomenal advances. Where there was once fretting about the use of forage fish, anchovies and sardines in aquaculture diets, there are now feed formulations that use proteins and oils from agriculture combined with microalgae and yeasts that meet the nutritional needs of the fish and result in equally nutritious and delicious farmed products. The early anguish about antibiotic use in aquaculture has been vanquished with the wide adoption of integrated fish health management plans and probiotics and prebiotics in fish diets. There's probably less antibiotic use in offshore aquaculture than in any other animal farming out there. The last few decades of selective breeding for salmon and marine fish have also resulted in phenomenal increases in growth rate, disease resistance, yield, and product quality. We once took 10,000 years to breed better chickens, but now we can apply modern selective breeding technologies to produce better fish faster on less feed inputs. In Kona, Hawaii, where we are based, we've been able to grow our kampachi, which is a sashimi grade fish that's a tropical cousin of the Japanese yellowtail. We can grow them on a diet that has completely eliminated all of the fish meal and all of the fish oil. We have no reliance on any marine sourced ingredients in the diet, and the fish grow just as well. And actually, they taste even better. Trust me, we've done extensive research sampling platters full of sashimi, and they are delicious. Farming fish in the ocean is harnessing the economic incentives to meet our Earth's ecological imperatives. It's aligning conservation and commerce. It is seeing the oceans not just as a victim of the global climate crisis, but as a solution to that which ails our planet. Eat more farmed fish. We can all help, one forkful or one fillet at a time. It's better for us, it's building sustainable businesses, and it's better for our oceans and our Earth. Thank you and aloha.